Hey everybody, welcome to the Skill Me Up Expert Talk Introduction to Blazor. My name is Brian. I am going to be your presenter for today. Now, I've been working in .NET since it was released to beta in 2001, and I've been in various web development positions throughout my career. So I've worked with all the tech stacks along the way, like ASP.NET 1, 2, Web Forms, MVC, and now I've been looking into .NET 5 with MVC and Razor Pages, as well as Blazor as well. So as .NET has been evolving. So in addition to web solutions for many different companies, I've been teaching in computer science for Franklin University out of Columbus, Ohio since about 2010, and I've developed a lot of online training courses since about 2013. I have a bachelor's degree in computer science from Iowa State and a master's from University of Phoenix in computer information systems. So also you'll note there my Twitter is BL Gorman, my LinkedIn is or Brian L. Gorman at LinkedIn there. Please connect with me. I'd love to hear from you and connect with you and interact. So today what we'd like to do is just take a look at Blazor and get started with a Blazor project and see what exactly Blazor is all about. So we'll start out by building a default project. We'll look at using built-in identity so that we have entity framework built in and a local database. We'll progress from there into looking at working with components, and we'll talk about as we add the components, how we can set navigation, and then what we do about events and binding with those components. We'll also look at routes and routing constraints, which are interesting and easy to use in Blazor. And as with any web app, of course, you want to have a little bit of look at the page lifecycle. So we'll talk about that and specifically, different parts of how that might play out as we do through some of the demos. If you've ever used authorization in MVC, this authorization with Blazor will be very familiar to you, so you won't have any trouble using it. It's basically the same thing. You can have authorization on the server and on the client. And a new pattern that's very important in Blazor that you will be introduced to today is going to be called the app state pattern, which will help us to keep track of objects in state as we move through some different requests. As you need to validate your forms, of course, we'll look at validation and see how we can do that with Blazor. And then we'll close by looking at just a few more resources from Microsoft that you can use to take the next steps of your journey. So as we get started here with Blazor, I just want to say the default project out of the box has a lot to offer. Without even writing a line of code, there'll be a couple of things in place. So we're going to just take a look at that. We'll see what the differences are between a couple of different project types, and then we'll focus on the WebAssembly project type as we move through the remainder of the talk. So I just want to start out by saying, the more I use Blazor, the more I start to see how Blazor is actually capable of delivering very solid applications in the .NET ecosystem. So there are multiple flavors, so your team can choose what it needs depending on what the needs of the team are and what your governance and all these other things that you need to take into account might cause your architecture to need to look like. So the difference here is where a JavaScript framework requires a lot of things like NPM and other configuration for the client, Blazor just works. So if you don't know a lot of JavaScript and you've been using C# for a long time, this might actually revolutionize your development. The ability to write code in .NET standard libraries also makes it possible that your teams can then share code across your apps very easily. Now, it is limited to the .NET standard library to share the code, but that still gives you the ability to share some of those components and things. So along with Blazor, you'll also become more familiar with Razor Pages, because that's going to be kind of the default architecture of a Blazor app. And so if you've been a web forms developer for a while and you never really got into MVC, you might actually really like this functionality. This is an approach to web development that kind of uses a similar to the MVC, but a lot less moving parts, and the Blazor actually puts the code and the HTML in line in the same page with the Razor Pages. Additionally, just like any other .NET technology, Blazor offers component libraries that are already built by your favorite component library of choice, such as Telerik or DevExpress. And also you can use Blazor on any browser or device, and it has the ability to integrate into a progressive web application functionality like offline notifications, push notifications on the desktop, and even homepage installation on devices. So in any WASM or WebAssembly client project, everything is run through the browser. The assets are deployed as static files, and the app is executed in the browser, with all the UI operations happening in the same process. This ultimately gives us the same type of experience you would come to expect from any SPA running on a JavaScript framework like Angular, Vue, or React. And of course, nothing is done the same. So knowing a JS framework will only help you know the concepts, not how to accomplish them. So fully functional after deployment, client download, you can get this, it'll be automatically up and running. You can be served from any static site provider like a CDN or GitHub Pages. And again, it is limited to the .NET Standard product, .NET Standard libraries to be used with the code in a WebAssembly project. Now, server-side apps, the other type of project, are hosted in an ASP.NET Core app and connect via SignalR to communicate between the server and the client UI, much like a traditional website would do. So a JavaScript file, blazor.server.js, is responsible for keeping the client UI and server communication in place, and the app needs to make sure to manage its state well. So server loads a lot faster than WASM, and the server project has the ability to fully leverage .NET with .NET Core 3.1, and ultimately we'll see .NET 5 in the future, I'm sure. As with any server website, server code is not available to the client. So since the server and UI communication has to take place via SignalR, there's a higher response time between the project, whereas WASM will be a more like a JavaScript feel with an instantaneous click and have events happen. So just a little bit of two differences between the two there. So both of them can be deployed in Docker containers if that's your thing. If you like to put things into containers, they're both capable of going out into Docker. And server projects do render with more traditional HTML, while WASM projects use a component graph. So that's similar to the DOM that you would see in a JavaScript, but it contains the state and the markup is binary. So you don't see all of the stuff that you would see in the WebAssembly project that you would see in a normal web project. More information can be found at that link there for the docs.microsoft.com, ASP.NET Core, Blazor hosting models. And so you can see that there. It's also where I got those images. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to dive in and do demos. And we're going to do some demos here, and these demos will run automatically, and I'll talk over top of them. And so as these demos are running and as the rest of this talk is going, I would ask that you would hold questions. There's a lot to cover in the next 45 to 65 minutes, and I'll take questions at the end. So if you have questions, please keep them handy for the end of the talk. So in this first demo here, what we're doing is we're creating a Blazor application that's going to be WebAssembly. So we go out, we just create our application just like you would any other project, select the directory where you want to put it. You can put it, of course, anywhere on your computer, just like anything else. And you'll go ahead and make this program, name it what you want, and then go ahead and create it. And then you'll get the choice. And this is, of course, using the most recent version of .NET Visual Studio 2019. So you get a choice between WebAssembly and Server App. This is not a preview version. So you see there I chose ASP Core hosted and a progressive web application, and I'm bringing in user accounts. Now the ASP.NET Core hosted does give me an API that I can interact with. So the WASM project will have one project and the server has another, and then there's a shared component library. It generates a weather forecast object that we're going to see here in a minute. You see that it's going to be in the .NET Standard 2.1 library target framework. That's going to be our shared code. Now our server is going to be a traditional API. It's going to be just like any other .NET API you've ever worked with in Core 3.1. It's going to have controllers and paths to get code. And then the client is going to be the WASM project, and it will be in 2.1. We also have a local database because we brought in the identity, and we have the ability to do our injections just like you would in any other .NET project here for adding Razor pages, adding your authentication, adding any framework. All that stuff is handled the same way you would be used to doing that in any API here in the server project. So this is a WASM client with a server API that it's going to be connecting to. So here you see authorization, API controller. The route is going to be the controller there, and it's going to essentially let us get in here and grab this weather forecast. Razor Pages changes the controllers a little bit in that you only usually have a get and a post. So that's a really interesting thing. It kind of keeps your controllers a little smaller. And so here you see the shared projects views that we have. So they have a nav menu here, and these are all going to be Razor pages. You see there's code in line as well as just normal HTML in these Razor pages. And just a couple of links here. You have a main layout here where you're going to import the nav menu component, and that's where the body will be injected for all of the code that you'll be writing. And then your login display allows you to be authorized. It allows you to make sure that people sign in or sign out as they need to. Now, don't worry, we're going to see all of this built out throughout the rest of this talk, so I know this is going really fast, but I just kind of wanted to give a brief overview of what we're looking at here as we get going. So you see there's quite a bit going on. Razor pages are going to be the pages that actually have routes. You see a route at the top, you see components brought in, and then of course you see different attributes you can put, such as authorize. You can inject HTTP clients, and you have using statements for different libraries that you want to use in your code. So again, everything is all in line in a Razor page. So you have your HTML at the top, your code at the bottom. So it's really nice, keeps things small and simple, and hopefully keeps that controller bloat that we've seen in MVC projects from happening. So you see it's also using Bootstrap. Normal index here, this is the main page that's loaded. You see that it tells us it's loading. If an error happens, this is where that's shown. And essentially the app is going to inject the code into this page. So now a manifest exists if you want to make a progressive web application. So that's what this is all about. We aren't going to do much with that today, but just know that any progressive web application does need a manifest.json. So if you're going to do that, you'll have that there. So we run the project here. We do have the full ability to interact with login. Here's our fetch data. It's going to require our authorization because we did have that authorization on there. So now we have to register our account. Anytime we're registering an account locally, of course, we need migrations if we haven't applied them yet. So this is going to do that. We're going to go ahead and refresh the page, confirm the account so that it'll actually activate it so we can log in. Now we're going to log in, and we'll see that we now have access to the weather forecast data. And it's just making a call to the controller. This is just a counter component, and this is just our base home page. This is all out of the box. We didn't write a single line of code. So, all right. And so that was the WASM with the server project. So the next thing I want to do is go through a server project, and we'll go through this one a little more quickly. Again, we're going to create a project, but this is going to be the difference here, where if you have the WASM with the server project, everything is going to be all in one project in this one. Now you could get the WASM project all in one project as well if you didn't select the ASP.NET host. You'll see the server app will also give us a choice for hosting in Docker right there, as well as our individual accounts will also have a connect to a cloud store, where the other one didn't for some reason. So now everything's in one application, but you'll see that it's ultimately the same stuff. It's just now it's run with the full power of .NET 3.1 on the server side. And so we have add Razor pages, we have our server side Blazor, we have the same endpoint injection, just a little bit different routing there. And then we have our program where we would inject stuff as well. And app settings, again, is going to be our connection string to our database. You see our app.razor page where we have our authentication, cascading authentication, which allows authentication to go throughout the whole site. We have the imports, which is just bringing in using statements for the whole page, for the whole site. Again, the same nav menu, body. Main layout's going to have the same nav menu. Login display is going to be the same. You still have the counter component here. It's still doing the same thing with a Razor page, so it looks extremely similar. Again, everything's just all in the same project here, and when it's compiled and run, this will be the server-side project, so all of the stuff will happen locally on your server instead of in the client on the WASM project. So here we'll run the migrations first to make sure that we don't have to see that again when we log in. And again, that's just the same exact type of flow we would have had as before. Still using Bootstrap, still have our own ability to inject our own CSS. And basically when this runs, you'll see everything. It does have full 3.1 or ultimately 5 in the future, leverage the entire .NET framework. So if you need stuff that's outside of .NET Standard, you're probably looking at a server project, right? So again, here we've just logged in, and just to show that everything works exactly the same here. Our counters, our fetch data, everything's good to go. So we're already authorized, so we didn't have to reauthorize there. So that's basically the difference between a server and a non-server project. So the next thing, if you've ever worked with MVC, you can think of a component as something like a partial view. But also know that with Razor pages, we now have our code directly in the component, as we've said a couple times. So the WASM project will allow for these components to be fully functional, reusable, and self-contained so they can be easily moved between different pages. So what you'll see here is when you create the new component, you'll be able to add it to the page at any point, wherever you see fit, using the simple markup. And you can build that with optional parameters on the component so that your site can easily integrate the component with multiple pages, and it'll have different configurations on each page as you desire. As we look into the components throughout the demos, we'll see these components leverage binding and using events. And so that's where the real power of everything's going to happen for us to get things to happen as we click buttons and handle or delegate those interactions across components or within the component itself. So in this next demo, what we'll do is we're going to just take a look at the counter component that we saw in the original deployed WASM project. We're going to see how we can easily use that across different applications, and then we'll talk about how we can inject parameters to have different functionality on different pages. When you run your projects in .NET to do a Blazor project that's a web server project, or that's a WASM project, excuse me, you don't get the F5 debugging functionality that you're used to. So every time we run it, you would do a control F5. It's just important to know if you're actually trying to run the code. It would bomb out if you didn't. So here what you see is we have our button. It has a on-click increment count event. It says click me. So you click it, it's going to call increment, which is just current count plus plus. So as you see, count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What we're going to see here is the power of these components is we can easily just place one on the index page. So here we've got our counter component, which was fully self-contained and actually on its own page. We're going to go ahead and put this counter component on the index as well. So now when we go to our index, you see there's a counter at the bottom. So here's our counter page, normal operation, and here's our home page with the counter. And you see they're independent of each other, so they're not keeping the same state where they have the same count. And so basically you see how that works. Now, one cool thing about this is with components, you can actually do some parameters. And so this parameter here that we're going to create is called an increment count. And what that's going to do is give us the ability to determine if we want the increment to be 1 or something else. And so we'll just use that increment count in our click event. And then as we use it on different pages, we can change the functionality. So here on the index, we're going to go ahead and do an increment amount of 25. And when we do this, what we'll see is our counter page will still count by 1, but our index counter will count by 25. So it's pretty cool without changing any code. Just that parameter gives us the ability to really interact quickly. So the next thing we need to talk about then is navigation, pages, and styling. So now that we're kind of familiar with how these projects work, let's actually start building a real-world project. So navigation is going to work just like you would expect. There's going to be a list items, LI event inside of a LI markup inside of a UL. And it's just like what you would do with Bootstrap. You have each link, each sharing, pointing to a different shared file. You can leverage Bootstrap, or you can get additional styling for material. It just depends on how you want to do it. Creating and routing to pages is as simple as saying, here's my page, give me the route, which is /page. There's no jumping through 3 different places and routers and handlers to make the routing work, which you might see if you're doing a traditional SPA architecture in a JavaScript where you have to go modify the router, you have to go modify the navigation file, and then you might even have a third or fourth place that you have to modify to get all of your links and navigation and routing to work together nicely. In Blazor, you'll see that it works much more easily than that. So before we go into the next part of the talks, I just want to say that to continue with this talk from this point on, we're using the .NET talk, which is a Blazor pizza shop. So Blazor Pizza Shop is going to have a lot of stuff built in out of the box. It's going to have the server, the shared, and the client, like we've seen in the WASM project. It also has a components library that has a maps component, which we won't actually build in our demo here, but you'll have information. And I'll show how that works at the end that you can see if you want to go out and continue this project at the end. So there's going to be some pretty important objects like pizza, order, specials, toppings. Those are all going to be built for us, and there's going to be controllers around them. So we're just going to be leveraging a lot of that. And then, we'll have the ability to interact with the server for the controllers as we need to. You'll have your imports, your app raiser as well, and that will help us to make sure that we have all of our code as we need it. So the first thing we're going to do is take a brief moment to just look through this application, and then we'll look at adding some navigation and layout. So here you see the Blazing Pizza client. It has the shared library with a bunch of different components, classes that we could use. Pizza special, pizza order, pizza topping. So those are going to be important classes as we build out this code. And it gives us the ability to look through and see these different classes and see what they have available to them. So, for example, order has a list of pizzas. Pizza has information about toppings, etc. On the server project, we have all of our controllers, just like you would expect. The pizza's controller doesn't really have much in it right now, but the specials and the orders are going to be pretty important to us. So there's also a database context for the pizza store. It is using SQLite, so it's all in line here. And here's our specials controller, which gives us a list of specials. We're going to use that right away. And then there's also the orders controller. So here again, use your map component. We won't take a lot of time with that. But here is our main client project. We'll have out of the box an app Razor, which is kind of the landing page. You have the router assembly there. You have either it's going to work or it's not. It's going to say, sorry, there's nothing here. Here's the imports, which is again just a bunch of using statements that are common across all pages, especially our shared libraries. And then you have the main layout, which is right now nothing more than the injection of the body. And then the index.razor, which is our landing page. It's just the default route, and it just says Blazing Pizzas. So when we run this Control F5, it's just going to say Blazing Pizzas. Nothing spectacular going on yet. And so what we'll do is we're going to add some changes here to this. So first, we're going to bring in the HTTP client so that we can actually make a call out. We have some code for the list of pizzas specials, and then we're going to go out and get that from the specials route. And so what that'll do is give us all of the pizzas that we want to display on our index page. And this div is just going to give us the ability to loop through and show all of the specials. So for each special, in specials, we'll have its background image, we'll have its title and its description, and then a formatted base price. So here on the special controller, pizza special itself, that's just showing us that these of course line up with the actual special object. That's how we're getting that code there. If you're not familiar with Razor code, @ gives you the ability to get to the code. So that's what those @ symbols are for, @ if, @ special. So there's our route for specials. And so when we're calling that, it's basically just saying, give me the specials, and it'll return a list of pizza specials. And then we can use that in our for each loop there using the get call. It's giving us the pizzas ordered by base price descending. So there you see now they're there. And of course, this looks nicer than just the default app because they've already put stuff in the style sheet and they've already put information into the layout, into the assets file. So here we're going to add a navigation item for a pizza. And so you see that's just very easy to do. You just drop in that navigation link and you tell it, I want this image, this code, and basically the route that you want it to go to, which is the blank route there, that href equals nothing. Again, here's our CSS. So this is just going to show that you have full control over the CSS and Bootstrap, just like you would in any other project. So first here, we're just going to change the color of the background top bar. So when we do that and we go ahead and rerun the project, you'll see now that top bar color is going to change. And just like that, you have other options available to you as well. For example, we're going to make these size a little bigger when you move over them. So instead of 1.02, we'll make it 1.25. And so when this runs now, they'll just size a little bigger. So you can see that you have full control over the CSS, just like you would expect. It's all there for you. So if you're used to web development, that should be nothing new. And it gives you the confidence that you can build these components in a way that gives you the control you'll need to style your site and use it as expected. So now that we kind of understand a little bit about navigation and routing, the next step that we have is going to be handling events. And so obviously with any web application, event handling is going to be important. And how is this going to work? So right now when we click things, nothing happens, and we need to change that. So it's important to note that events can be easily wired up. As you're working through the events, you just basically tell buttons what to click on or what it needs to do. But what happens is there's code on the Razor page that handles it, or it can actually be delegated. So you can use kind of a delegation pattern where you say, I want to raise this event, and the other page handles it. And we'll see all of that in place. And it's not as tricky as it used to be, where you actually have to say raise and actually create a delegate. It's all just wired in, baked in. So you just basically say, this is my event, and then the other page just responds to it. It's pretty cool. So you'll create a dialog here that's going to show the ability for the user to click on the pizza and configure it, and then we'll take that information and show that information as ordered. So that's going to be what we're going to do here in this demo. And so what we'll see here is first thing we're going to do is add an on-click event here just to show how this works. On the list items, we can easily respond in the console. Now you see as we click on them, they're shown. And so let's change this to be an actual method, show configure pizza. Right now it's not written, so there's nothing to go to. And then if we write that method, show configure pizza, you see here we're going to create a new pizza, and we're going to tell it we want to show the dialog. Now we can navigate to the symbol because it's there, but we still need our variables for configuring pizza and show configure dialog. So let's bring those in. And so those are just local variables right now. And you see this is giving us that dialog, tells us it wants to show it. So we need to create the dialog. So here under the shared, we're creating the configure pizza dialog. We're dropping in the Razor syntax for this page to HTML, which is the pizza name, the pizza description, and the total price. And then we have that parameter for that pizza that we're passing in. So you click on it, you say, send me this pizza. That pizza is actually going to display in that dialog. And then here we say, pass in that configuring pizza. So this is similar to how we put 25 in the counter. We're doing the same thing with the pizza here. So the full pizza object will be passed to that configure pizza dialog. So now when we click on this, you see there's my buffalo chicken, there's my price and description. Right now nothing else is wired up, which is a big problem because there's no way to get out of this dialog at this point. But at least we see that our event is responded and showing that configure as we expected. So let's make that happen. So here is our dialog body. We're going to add the pizza sizes, and we're going to have a range slider here. So this is actually going to let us interact with the pizza now. So we can say, I want to make the pizza size change, but we don't have the event responded to. So it's still a problem, but we do have the slider in place. So now we need to respond to the event. So we're going to bind it to the pizza.size. And as we do this, now you see that the pizza size will change, but you see that it only changes as I let go. We want this to change every time we hit an increment. So we're going to do this bind event on input, which is just the ability to do that. And that will basically make it so every time I slide it, it's going to go ahead and change that price without me letting go of the click button, which is pretty cool. Still don't have cancel an order, so we need to make that happen. We need to make a couple other things happen, of course, to make this useful. So let's go ahead and add the ability to add extra toppings. So this gives us a chance to show we can bring in all the toppings in a drop-down list. And on change, we're going to select the topping, We're going to actually put those toppings that are selected into a list and give the ability to just remove toppings if we decide we didn't want one. So you see that's all that code's doing. And now we need our toppings, and we need to bring in different methods across those to handle those events. So we have toppings selected, add topping, remove topping, and then we have a toppings list that we need, and that'll give us the ability to get those toppings. We're going to run this, and what we'll see is that the problem is that we haven't brought the toppings in yet. So right now there's nothing in the list. Everything's still working, but no toppings. So we need to get those loaded. So once again, we just make another call here, and this is going to be the on initialize. So when the page initializes, it will call out and get all the toppings. And so I didn't have a definition for get from JSON async, and that's because I don't have my HTTP client imported. So I need to inject the HTTP client, and then I have the ability now to get my toppings. So they're basically just in that drop-down list. I'm just selecting them. It's just responding to the event just like before, changing the sizes. But we still can't click the order or cancel. So we're getting there, but we haven't given us the ability to do what we really want to do with the pizza yet, which is actually order it. So it's great that we're doing this right before lunch, right? All right, so we have an on cancel and on confirm event. So we're going to put those in play. And what we'll do is on this button for the ability to cancel and confirm, from that we'll actually respond to those events. So cancel and confirm events happen here in the configure pizza dialog, but it really needs to respond to the event here on the index page. So on cancel, we'll run the cancel confirm. So we need to actually move this outside of the configure pizza and actually handle it on the index. So you see, all we did was we said that there's an event that's going to happen on the dialog, and now we're responding to it in the configure pizza dialog. And so we need to make sure that we put this in the right place. That's in the wrong place there. It needs to be an attribute on the tag. And then we also need the response to the confirm as well eventually. So right now we're able to cancel. We aren't able to order. And so that at least is wired up and working. But again, we put the event on the component, and then we handled the event on the page it was on. So that's pretty cool. So the basic automatic delegation there. So here we're going to on confirm as well, and this is going to be our order event. So now we'll be able to order the pizza. It's going to add it to the order. Of course, at this point, we don't have the ability to do anything because we haven't done anything with the orders. But what we've seen now is we've handled events. We've responded to events both in the same component and in different components by raising the event and then handling it in the other component where we basically told it how to handle the onConfirm and the onCancel. So very, very straightforward and easy to wire up the events. We saw the binding as well on the slider. And so now we're in a pretty good place to start working on building out the orders. So here's a configured pizza item. So every pizza item is going to have a special name and a topping and then the total price. So you have a bunch of toppings or no toppings at all, the price that it's going to show, and then as we add those to our order, we'll be able to display those on the side. So this is a sidebar. It's going to say, give me all of my configured pizza items, and then it's going to basically delegate that onRemoved event to remove a configured pizza, and then we need to have that method. So there's our remove configured pizza, as well as a new one for placing the order. So now we're actually going to add it to an order object. Even though we still won't be able to see the order objects, at this point we will actually have created an order in memory that we can work with soon. So this time we'll draw up a new pizza here, and we'll go ahead and order it. And you see now on the right hand side we see our order information. And so our different pizzas are being added to our order here, handled by that sidebar with all those different order objects. It's just that same component being shown over and over again, and the total of the entire order is also handled like we would expect. So now that we've seen a bunch about events and working with different responses to those events on our pages, we need to see the routing and route constraints and how this is going to work as we build out our project. So we've already set this up, but we need to actually respond to something like the ID of an entity or a string or other type that dictates how the page should respond. And that routing gives us the navigation that we need. So what we'll see is that that's all done in the Razor page directive. And adding a constraint is as easy as saying, I want this in my route. And you need to tell it what type it is if it's not a string. That's the only difference that might be new to some people. You'll say this is an int or this is a double. And so here we're going to build out some route constraints so you can see this in action. So the first thing we're going to do is create a My Orders page. And this My Orders page is just going to list out the orders that we have. So right now there's nothing at this address because we haven't wired it up. But the nav link button does work. So we create our My Orders Razor. This you see up there at the top, page/My Orders. That gives me my route. So there's my route that I said I want my orders to go to. It's that simple. And now my orders is handled in the My Orders page just by saying I want my orders. So again, there's not a lot of configuration you need. So of course we'll need our HTTP client to get information about our orders. And here's going to be our order with status list and basically call out to get the orders from the orders controller. And so again, there's our orders controller. Getting the orders is just going to show us a list of all the orders that are available and give them to us. And so right now it's not user specific. We'll get to that later. But you see here, we're going to have different responses. If it's null, just show it's loading. If there aren't any, show no orders placed, order some pizza. If there are some, show some orders. So we need to make the show some orders actually do something useful. So here's where we're going to place our code to go ahead and get the order information, display the created time, the pizza count, the formatted total price, the status text, and the order ID. And you see that route there, my orders/item order ID. That's a new route. It's going to tell us I want the specific order, and we'll need to wire that up. So here we see track, and sorry, there's nothing at this address because we haven't wired up my orders 1. So it doesn't know how to handle that yet. So how do we make that handle? So let's create an order details page to actually respond to that. And you see at the top here is the My Orders with the order ID. And note that it is saying that this is expecting an integer. Again, you don't have to do anything for a string, but if you're using a Boolean or bool, if you're using a double, if you're using an int, you do. You can put string there, but you don't need to. And there, of course, int is what we want. So now when we respond to it, it'll actually go ahead and show me the order details for order 1. Of course, we need to go out and actually get the order. So this is going to use a polling strategy because there are different statuses on the order. And so this the polling strategy is going to continue to pull the database while it's not delivered. And so you'll see here it's also going to call out to the order ID route on the controller, which is important. So this is where it's going to distinguish from just getting all orders versus just the order with an order ID. Here's our controller. It's just an HTTP GET, but here we have a parameter, and you notice that this is different because it takes the order ID versus the regular HTTP GET, which doesn't have an order ID. So that's how it's determined which API controller to run. It's unique. It returns the order with status if there is one, otherwise not found, and then that will display out to our page. So now we need to show details for our order ID here. And so this is basically, again, if it's an invalid order, couldn't be loaded. If it's still loading, if it's not loading, and then if it is done, it'll actually show that order status information. And of course, there's a tracking information that we have there to fill in later. But for right now, we're able to do that. So this is an order review Blazor page. It's just going to show every pizza that we have with all of its toppings and the total price, and then that order that's passed in. So that's going to show us all that information, and then now we'll drop that order details component into our tracking. So now we have all of our orders that are on that order status. It'll be all the pizzas for that order will show. And so when we click this now, we can go ahead and see, here's our buffalo chicken and our basic cheese and our total price that we had for that order. And so routing, getting that to work was as simple as making sure that we had those routes in place at the top of each page, and then the correct places when we clicked on buttons. There wasn't any other configuration needed, and we just made sure that that all worked. You see the different statuses here. Ultimately, as that status moves through, it will change. So one other thing, since this is using the cancel token, we did need to add an iDisposable to make sure we don't have lots and lots of connections pulling at the same time and override our server. And then we're going to basically go here into this place order and complete the order. So if you complete the order now, it'll actually take you right to the orders information page so that you don't feel like nothing happened as a user. So before, when we clicked on an order, it didn't go anywhere. Now, if we click on an order, it'll actually take us to that page. Say, here's your order information. So once again, we'll spin up a couple pizzas here, go ahead and place an order, and we'll see that instead of just going back to this page, it'll actually now take us directly to the order place details with its status. So now the user knows that they actually have something ordered. We get that immediate feedback. All right, so there is a problem with our code as it exists right now, and that can be solved with a thing that's called the app state pattern. So right now, one issue is that the current state of the application is not held when you move across a couple of posts. So the app state pattern will fix this. And so what we need to do to make the app state pattern work is we need to create an object that's specific for the state we want to track. And then we add that object with state to a state tracking object. And then we'll use dependency injection to put that state tracking object in as a scoped identity, or a scoped object, excuse me, for state management. And so what we'll see here is that if we were to go out and run this application right now, and we start creating an order, and then we look at the orders page, we're going to lose our current order that's in process. So those two pizzas are there. I go out and I look at an order. It doesn't matter if I click on track or not, but I will. I go back, I've lost my order information. So that's not really user-friendly to a user who is in the process of maybe reviewing an order they did. So we need to do this thing called the app state pattern. So we're going to add a scoped object called order state, and we'll create the order state object eventually here. But we'll also inject the order state object into our index page so that we can track the state. So here we're creating the order state class, and it's just going to track those variables, the configure dialog, the pizza, the order, information that we have that we need to track across those different posts for the single request that user is doing. And so here what we'll do, since we're going to be handling all that, we're going to move it out of the index and move it into the order state. So here we have the show configure pizza, cancel configure, confirm, and reset and remove. All of those methods now are going to be handled in that order state object. So that means on our index page, we need to clean that up. So again, we also have the variables that we're tracking. And here what we'll see is with this code now, we can get rid of the variables that we're tracking. And I should have removed order here, but I didn't. So we'll see that error in a second. But I'm also going to take all of these different methods out that are no longer needed, and instead now we'll use this order state object to track our order. So that means we need to change everything up here to leverage our order state. And so what that does is that creates that scoped object called an order state, which will then handle the information that's taking place. And as we go across the request, then that order state will store that I basically have started working on an order, and I won't lose it this time. So here we're going to start creating our order just like we were used to. And you see over on the right, no pizzas. That's because I forgot to get rid of the order. So I need to make sure that my order is also tracked in my state. And so that's going to happen here. And now we should see the page working as expected. Oops, there's still an error. I still had one more or two more to fix here. So all right, so now we should be able to create our order and track it. And now the order state is what you're seeing over on the right-hand side, is storing all the different pizza information that's in that order that's ready to be placed. And now if I go browsing out to my orders, and even if I click on any of the different orders, I can come back and you see my order state is maintained. So that's the app state pattern. It says put your stuff that you're going to keep in basically like a session. It's not a session, but it's that object for order state, and keep track of it as we go across these different posts. So all right, with any web application, of course, you're going to want to make sure that the user is giving you good information. So you're going to do validation, and there's a thing called an edit form that we can use, and an input text that we can use in these Blazor tools. And these are really cool things that allow us to do validation very quickly. And like I said before, it's a lot like MVC. So if you're used to working with MVC, you'll have the same kind of data annotations that you're used to. So what we need to do is make sure that our users are giving us the correct data, and then give us that information correctly, but also give them information about what they need to fix as quickly as possible. And we really don't want to spend a lot of time worrying about this. We want the system to handle it for us. We just kind of want to say, I definitely want this required. I want the max length, just like you would expect on any data annotation that you've used on any model before. And so we're going to do that. We're going to add some checkout here, where we can actually check out an order. So the route's going to just be checkout. And I've injected another error here that we'll see in a second on purpose so that you can see what happens. But here we have different components we're adding. We're going to place the order on click, and we're going to essentially say, here's our order state if we want to place it. So we're going to bring our place order method now into this component. And we're going to go ahead and remove that from the other one. So now our index is really just displaying information about the pizzas, and the order state's tracking what we're ordering, and the place order is going to happen within the actual component that we're looking at. So here we have the checkout button, gives us the ability to go ahead and place that order. This is the place order that's being handled in the checkout component. You see here, checkout started with a small c. That's a problem. So all components have to start with a capital C. A really simple error, really painful when you do it. So now what we have is we're going to be able to have this order form, and we're going to say order. Now it's going to give us a checkout form when we say place order. And oops, it's not wired up correctly yet, so we still need to get the checkout form wired up in here. So we need the address editor, and this is going to give us all of the information about the address of the user to where we're going to send the pizza. So their name, their street address, their city, their state or region, and their postal code. And it's just an address object which was already built for us. All that's there. And of course, we have information to work with that then, because it's already part of our database, such. So the order state has an order has a delivery address. So that's what we're going to inject onto the checkout page here. And so now when we run this, we can check out and ask the user to give us some orders. But I still didn't get it in the right place in my layout, so I want to fix that quickly. So I want to put that up inside of my checkout columns there, just so that it looks more user-friendly. Now you see I have my order on the left-hand side, information about the user on the right-hand side. But at this point, nothing's validated. So I could basically check out my order with any information or no information, and it'll place the order. So we need to put validation on that address editor in order to make sure that it works correctly. So here you see on our orders controller, we're going to go ahead and make a call, and that address is going to have the data components for the different address information. So you see required, max length, and most of these are just very simple. One other thing to note is that as we do these, we can put custom error messages for when the validation doesn't work, which we'll see in a little bit. So now when I do this, if I try to place my order, you see the error has happened because I haven't told the user how, what happened. So I need to wire that up. So I need to make sure that I have validation in place on my checkout page. So I'm going to use this thing called an EditForm. And the EditForm is going to wrap with the model I'm validating the form that I'm actually submitting. So here my order state.order.address is what I'm validating. And then I'll place all of this code that I've already written, including the place order button, inside of that edit form. And I need a validation summary, of course, to tell us that there's a problem with the page and we need to actually run the validation, of course. So we're going to drop a couple of attributes in here: data annotation validator and validation summary. Now, unfortunately, I put those in the wrong place, which creates an error. We'll fix that in a minute here. So we're also going to make sure that we only place the order now when it's valid. So this is wiring up the on valid submit. So it only will now place an order if validation is passed. So we'll create a couple errors here, or excuse me, orders, pizzas. We'll place the order and errors happen. You see that that's because my validation's in the wrong place. So I need to bring that up. That should have been within the form. And now when we place our order, you see there's our error summary. Now, the problem with this is that it's, not very user-friendly. It doesn't tell me anything's really happening. So what we want to do, it tells you what's happening, but it's not nice. It's not right next to everything. So we want to place a validation message on each one of these different inputs. So you see right now they're just inputs with a bind to the specific property on the model property that we're binding to. And so here we're going to create a couple of custom error messages as well. So here, if this is, the name is required, the name of the pizza is required, and we're going to do a thing on the city that's basically going to say, how do you expect us to get the pizza if we don't know what city you live in? So a nice little snarky message there for them. If they won't give us their city, then we can't give them their pizza. And so now everything's bound up and we have all this validation messages in place. We can get rid of the validation summary. We can use the direct validation. We'll create a couple pizzas here. And you see they're all now in place. There's still one problem though. Our messages are there like we expected, but it doesn't tell the user they got it right until they actually click place order. And we want the user to have input feedback immediately, as any JavaScript would do, right? So remember, we're kind of competing with JavaScript SPA here. So we want immediate feedback to the user. So in order to do that, we're going to use a thing called an input text. Now there's also checkbox text or input checkbox and input other controls as well. And we have to change the bind to a bind value to make these work. But what this will do is this will have an instantaneous feedback loop, just like a custom JavaScript validator would have had in an older web app. It basically tells you immediately if you get it right, as soon as you on blur, essentially, if you're used to JavaScript. As soon as you leave the form, it knows. And so there you see, now we have validation in place. We're able to place our orders as we would expect. We have all of that going on. One last thing we're going to do is wire up a button here to make sure that they can't double submit. So we'll inject a delay of 5 seconds after they click the button to basically make sure that when they submit, that we have the submit button pressed and they can't resubmit twice. Just like if you were taking your credit card, you don't want to charge the credit card twice. So it's basically just going to disable the button after they click it. So you see there, it's disabled. I could click 100 times. It wouldn't matter right now. It's just got that 5 second delay now on the place the order. So, That's just how we can keep our project from actually double submitting, as well as have all the validation we want in place. So that prevents a lot of errors for our users. All right, so now that we've seen binding, events, we've seen validation, it's time to talk about authorization. Now, authentication, authorization, we all know there's a difference. There's a big difference between the two of them. We're actually doing authentication in this application. And so we're only going to let the authenticated people place an order. We're not actually authorizing with roles or anything like that. So if you signed in, you're authorized, but you're also authenticated. So fun. We're also going to create some nicer redirects. If you have an error, if you need to log in, it's going to redirect you to a login page. We're also going to make sure that you don't lose the state during the login with that app state pattern again. And we'll provide a nicer logout experience for the user as they sign out, to not just be left to a "you've signed out" message. It'll just take you back to the start of the project. So here we're going to add in our identity management. We're going to add an authorize statement on the orders controller. So make sure that the user has logged in order to use this. So there's two different types. This is the server side. There's also client side, which we'll see in a little bit. And we'll see how that can create some differences. So this is going to be the server side app authorization here. We're going to give us the ability to make sure that the user logs in. We already had all that in place because we wired it up at the start. And you see it's using identity server, just like you would expect any .NET project to do with basic identity out of the box. Here we're going to have an authentication, and this authentication page is basically going to say, make sure that we're logged in. It's basically what it's doing, and that action is checking the login. And so we'll also need a page to log in, and this is going to make sure that our this cascading authentication state makes sure that our authorization goes throughout all of our pages. So once you're logged in across all components. So here's our login page, and that's just basically giving us our sign in. We saw this in the other application, but basically just dropping the same thing in here. And then of course we're going to make sure that only authorized users can see things, but we also want the ability to display that login. So here's our login display. That'll be the, hello Bob on the right hand side that says you're logged in. So right now we have our register and login. We're going to register, click to confirm. Now we're going to log in. You see, hey, there's Bob. So we're definitely logged in now. And so we see right now orders has a problem because I'm a specific user. So we'll fix all that in a little bit. So now we're going to create this orders client to track the order state for a specific user. You have the HTTP client that we're going to use to call out. We're basically going to move all of our HTTP client calls into this client object so that we can then leverage that throughout the application with our authorized user. And so we're using this authorization message handler that's injected here. So when we do our placing our order now, instead of doing the HTTP client, we're going to use a try, and we're going to call it to the orders client to place the order. And that orders client is going to be handling all of our HTTP requests from now on. So we'll need to inject that at the top as well. We're going to do that in a minute. But first, we're going to get this across the board for all of the pages that are doing HTTP. We're going to just basically call out to that orders client instead of a direct call. And so once we do that, we have a few errors because of the HTTP client being moved. And so we'll need to do that. But we're also going to wire up our user here. So this is all of the user IDs that we needed to make sure that orders are specific per user, which is of course important. And here we're going to change this to make sure that we have a nice "you are not authorized" message if you don't get logged in. So basically, rather than what we had before, we'll have that nice "you're not logged in." So now we need to fix our error with this HTTP client. So everywhere we have an HTTP client that we were using, we need to make sure that it's available to us through the orders client. Here we brought it into the orders client as well as the JSON handling for the get from JSON. And there's our normal calls that we were calling from other pages. So now instead of injecting HTTP client, we're injecting the orders client. And we're just using that as a wrapper around the calls to that HTTP client. And so with all that in place, now we have the ability to log in and make some calls. And we should be able to see our orders per user. But if we're not logged in, you see we'll have to log in, which is also going to show us another bug. And we'll fix that bug soon as well. But so here we're going to place our order. We're not logged in, and so it says you need to log in. Okay, and so this is the server side authentication. And so now if you notice, the orders are blank. So I'm logged in, so now I'm going to create my new order. I lost my order in that other one, so there's my order again. So that's a really bad user experience, obviously. We don't want to have to make them redo their order because they weren't logged in by accident when they first came to the page. But if they are logged in, it works. So we need to fix that. So, and this is just to prove that, multiple users can have different orders, and that's obviously to be expected. So this is going a little faster because we just wanted to show that you can actually easily track different orders for different users, which is what we wanted to make sure you could do. So based on who you are, your orders are different. All right, so let's fix some bugs. So first of all, we're going to do client-side authorization now as well, so that it'll authorize before it dies. And since before it sent it to the server and said you need to authorize, here we're going to do this navigate to authentication when we do it. So we're going to actually then make sure that you just redirect to login here, rather than showing it doesn't work. So now they're going to be driven by the client to a login page when things need to be logged in. And here we're also going to say you can only see your orders if you're logged in. So that authorized view just means it has to be logged in. So now I'm going to not be logged in. I'm going to create a pizza, and we'll still have a slight bug here, but at least we're a little bit closer than we were before, because now it's asking me to log in. But you see, I still lost my order. So I still have a $0 order there with no pizza. And I placed the order. And so that's really bad, because now I'm going to see my orders have a $0 order in it. So I still had to be logged in before I created the order. So we need to clean that up, but we have at least our order in place now if you're logged in, and we have some quicker redirecting on the client rather than waiting for the server to tell us that they weren't logged in. And that's in that weird logout page, it just says you're logged out. So we want to fix that too. All right, so let's fix the authentication state for the pizza. So this is our app state for the pizza authentication. So basically we're saying here's your order that we're going to track across these different pages. Here I have an error because I put that second line in that should have been on line 21, and I didn't realize that at the time I was doing this. And so it was already there, the add API authorization, and the pizza authentication state should have been brought in along with that. So we'll fix that in a second here before it runs, obviously. But you see here, we're also adding in that authentication state to be mapped there, and we have the ability to replace the order. So we need to add that to our order state as well. So a couple of different errors here to solve. So again, I need to solve this app API authorization, and then I realized that's because it was supposed to be above. And so we fix that here. And we'll actually build another piece into that add API authorization in a minute. So, and then I also needed to make sure I inherited from the remote authentication state on my object. And once I did that, then I was able to do a few more things, and I still need my replace order method. So let's go ahead and add that to our order state. And all that's going to do is just reset the order, essentially, to whatever you pass in. So now with all of that in place, I have the ability to track my order even across the login. So here you see, I'll start creating a login. I'm not registered, or I'm not logged in. So I'm going to log in as Bob. But you see now I have my order information, just like you would expect. I placed my order. I have all the information. So I didn't lose my order across. And so now we just need to fix that sign out. And in order to do that, we're going to add another piece to this add API authorization, which is just going to inject this logout succeed path is just going to be blank, which is just going to redirect us back to the startup page. So rather than showing that message when we log out, we're going to go ahead and see that it'll just take us back to the nice startup page. So no more strange message about just not being logged out. And so that basically covers getting authorization in place, the difference between server-side and client-side authorization, and how we were able to handle that and keep state across the request. So as with any application that we work with in .NET, if you ever take a test, you know Lifecycle is something they care a great deal about. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to take a look at the different events here, and we're not going to actually do another demo. But just know that just like anything else, Lifecycle events can be overridden. You have the choice between synchronous and asynchronous. They allow the critical interaction that you need whenever you're working at specific spots. If you're familiar with the like on render events or things like that from other web forms or whatever application type you were working on, there's different ones here that we'll be working with. So on initialized, set parameters, after render, should render, and status changed, which is automatic on events. And then of course dispose, which is not really a life cycle event, but I wanted to talk about this to make sure that you want to make sure you're using this on your components if they have things that are going across the page. All right, so to finish up here, we have a bunch of resources. So we worked through a few of these actually as we went through this talk today. The Blazor tutorial intro, the Blazor tutorial build, the Blazor app. These are different things you can go out there and look for. There's also that Blazor workshop that we were working through. That's the pizza. So the GitHub.NET presentations Blazor workshop. That's the pizza app we worked through. And then there's a couple of different things you can look at, like Blazor Styled or Blazor Strap, which are just some wrappers around your styling, and Material Blazor as well. So just other information for you on that as well. And the final thing I wanted to show you is I wanted to show you what it looks like at the end of the actual workshop. If you work all the way through, there's also some JavaScript interrupt that they do as well. We've seen most of the stuff that's the front page stuff, but there's a couple of other things behind the scenes. For example, if you click on removing an item from the order, there's a confirm dialog. There's also this nice little map that tracks your delivery. So here you can see this is interrupt that's happening. Obviously not really well wired up because that driver's driving through the river in London, unless he's maybe on the subway. I'm not sure, but he gets it to you, and that's how delivery status is changing as you go. But just to show also, here you have the ability to remove items from the order, and it gives you this pop-up. So you can actually use regular JavaScript within Blazor if you need to. So it's not limited to just WASM. So that's just our simple confirm dialog being called with a JavaScript interrupt. But that's basically what we didn't see from the app. So with that, that's basically all there was. So I lost my presentation. So we're at the end here. So just remember that there's two options you can use. You can have a server-side project, or you can have the WebAssembly project with server interaction through either SignalR or through an API. You have the ability to use reusable components across your entire application. They're easy to drag and drop with events and binding. It's a single-page architecture, so you can get your full feel of like a JavaScript environment, but it's all done with .NET, so that's really awesome, especially if you're not super familiar with JavaScript or don't like it for whatever reason. And we saw authentication and authorization, and we did not see static deployment, but I wanted to mention that because it's very easy to deploy these applications. Once they're designed, the static part, the WASM part, can be deployed through GitHub Pages or through Azure, and then you just need to make sure it interacts with your API or SignalR, whatever it needs to do correctly. So at this point, we're all done. I just wanted to open up the floor if there's any questions. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any questions right now. Nothing's coming in. But if you saw at the beginning, I did give my contact information. So if you're watching this on the recording and you want to reach out for questions, please feel free to do so. I'd love to hear from you, get your thoughts, and see what you think about the presentation. So I just wanted to let you know, thank you. Thank you for listening. This has been an expert talk called An Introduction to Blazor. My name is Brian Gorman, and this has been a presentation of Skill Me Up Training. Thank you very much.